All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly epic, ancient clash of powers that starts out incredibly small but ends up literally changing the course of history. We're looking at a fascinating narrative from the book of Exodus, exploring how a seemingly simple encounter in a royal court sets off a chain reaction that systematically dismantles an empire. As you'll see, the text moves from a highly focused, localized duel into a massive, cosmic war. We're starting right at the source text, at this incredibly tense moment of confrontation. Imagine the scene. Moses and Aaron are standing before Pharaoh, arguably the most powerful man in the world at that time. They've been challenged to prove their divine backing. So Aaron throws down his staff, and boom, it becomes a serpent. But then, Pharaoh's magicians do the exact same thing. They throw down their rods, and they also become serpents. It looks like a total stalemate, right until the impossible happens. Aaron's singular rod swallows up all the rods of the magicians. It's a striking visual, and as we're going to see, it's heavy with meaning. Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll cover the ultimate serpent duel, dive into the debate of magic versus demons, tackle the dilemma of the hardened heart, look at the war on the Egyptian gods, and wrap up with redemption and the Passover. Let's get to it. Section 1. The ultimate serpent duel. What's really fascinating here is the history behind the specific sorcerers who stepped up to duel Aaron. While the Old Testament text doesn't specifically name them, historical traditions, which have been noted by scholars like Calvin and later by the Apostle Paul, identify the ringleaders as Jannes and Jambres. These guys weren't just random street performers. They were the chief magicians, the wise men, and essentially the primary spiritual support system for the entire Egyptian monarchy. So the crucial point to understand here? This was absolutely not just a magic show. As the Kaufman commentary explains, this was a high-stakes encounter between two entirely different religious systems. You have Aaron stepping into his role representing the high priesthood of Israel, standing face-to-face with the priests of Egypt's nature gods. This initial duel really sets the tone for everything that follows. It's the spiritual authority of Yahweh versus the spiritual authority of Egypt's pantheon, all condensed into a single room. Moving right along to Section 2, Magic, Illusion, or Demons. Now, this brings up a massive unsolved mystery from the text that scholars have debated for centuries. How exactly did Pharaoh's magicians pull this off? I mean, did they possess actual supernatural power? Or was it just an incredibly convincing trick? The biblical text simply says they did in like manner with their enchantments, which leaves the how wonderfully ambiguous. Well, scholars like Constable and Kaufman generally point to three main theories for this counterfeit trick. First up is the illusion theory. Some older commentators suggest that skilled snake charmers could press the nape of a snake's neck, paralyzing it so it looks exactly like a stiff rod, and then weak it up when thrown down. Pretty wild, right? Second is the demonic theory. Dr. Constable notes they may have tapped into actual supernatural power granted by dark forces. And third, we have the divine permission theory. John Calvin argues that God deliberately permitted this delusion to give efficacy to the error, ultimately testing the hearts of everyone in the room. But hey, regardless of the mechanics behind the counterfeit trick, whether it was sleight of hand or something darker, the text hammers home the ultimate outcome. God's genuine article entirely consumed the illusion. Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. It's just a definitive, undeniable display of superiority that completely neutralizes the counterfeit. Which brings us to Section 3, the hardened heart dilemma. This part jolts us into a profound, honestly heavily debated philosophical dilemma regarding free will and divine intervention. If you read the text closely, it says both that Pharaoh hardened his own heart and that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So the natural question arises, is God unfair? Why on earth would he force a man to be stubborn only to unleash devastating plagues on his country as punishment for that very stubbornness? To get to the bottom of this, we need to look at Smith's commentary on the original Hebrew text. And what it reveals is a stark contrast between hardening as a primary choice versus stiffening an already stubborn resolve. There are actually two completely different Hebrew words at play here, even though they're both translated as hardened in English. One means to harden as a stubborn initial choice. The other literally means to make stiff, or to strengthen a position that has already been taken. It basically breaks down like this. Pharaoh made the initial choice to resist, and God merely firmed up that fatal decision. As Smith's commentary points out, God will often let you set your course, and then he will strengthen you in that course. Pharaoh exercised his free will first by hardening his heart against that initial miracle. In response, God stiffened Pharaoh's resolve. So the hardening wasn't some arbitrary manipulation. It was a judicial response to Pharaoh's persistent, stubborn unbelief. All right, let's pull the camera back a bit for Section 4, War on Egyptian Gods. This is where things get really wild. These plagues, they weren't just random natural disasters. The Bridgeway commentary maps this out brilliantly. They were highly targeted attacks on specific Egyptian nature gods. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile as a source of life, so God turns it to blood. They worshipped the sun god, Ra. God sends preternatural darkness. They venerated certain animals and prided themselves on priestly cleanliness, so God literally overwhelms them with frogs, lice, and swarms. Each plague is a precise, calculated strike against a specific deity in their pantheon. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, these plagues were designed to completely dismantle the Egyptian economy and belief system step by step. As Dr. Constable notes, they were systematic judgments meant to authenticate Moses' message. By the time these plagues had run their course, the fertile valley was in ruins, the proud will of the king was absolutely broken, and it was undeniably clear to both the Israelites and the Egyptians exactly who was in charge of nature. Yahweh's ultimate sovereignty was on full display. And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, Redemption and the Passover. So here we can see this incredible structural arc complete itself. I mean, think about it. What started with a few wooden rods on a palace floor has escalated into the literal life and death deliverance of an entire nation. The counterfeit powers of the world have been entirely, completely swallowed up by the genuine power of God. Now take a look at the massive acceleration of the timeline here. This builds an incredible momentum of deliverance. Moses spends 80 long years in Midian being prepared. Then the first plague, the Nile turning to blood, lasts a long, agonizing 7 days. But then, the final judgment, the slaying of the firstborn, happens in a single night. And that is followed immediately by the one-day triumphant crossing of the Red Sea. The pace of God's action just drastically quickens as the climax approaches. As the Kelly commentary highlights, the Passover itself was this highly specific ritual of redemption. Every detail mattered. You have a slain lamb to shelter the people. The meat had to be roasted with fire, representing fierce, unsparing judgment. They ate unleavened bread, indicating unfeigned purity and the cutting off of old, corrupting influences. And they ate it in haste, fully dressed, loins girded, ready to march right out of bondage. And this illustrates perfectly that this entire narrative was designed to establish a permanent memorial of salvation for the people. As the commentaries emphasize, salvation here isn't just some hopeful wish for the future. It is known, conscious, immediate deliverance. God steps in, breaks the power of the oppressor, and moves his people from absolute bondage into complete freedom. The Israelites weren't just escaping, they were being redeemed, purchased, and completely set apart. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Reflect for a moment on the counterfeits we face today. We all encounter systems, beliefs, or illusions that mimic the truth, and we all face moments where we have to choose whether to stubbornly harden our hearts or yield to what is genuine. Just like Aaron's rod swallowed the illusions of Egypt, what are the genuine truths in your life that need to swallow up the counterfeits? Keep that in mind as you go about your day, and keep seeking out the truth.